The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the small diner, blending with the low hum of conversations and the clatter of dishes. Emily Carter, a young waitress with big dreams but an empty wallet, moved swiftly between tables, balancing plates with practiced ease. This wasn't the life she had imagined. At 24, she had hoped to be anywhere but here, not stuck in a rundown diner in the middle of nowhere, serving customers who barely acknowledged her existence. But life had never given her choices. Orphaned at a young age, she had learned to survive on her own. No family, no safety net, just endless shifts and a handful of tips, until he walked in. At first, she hadn't noticed him. The diner was full, and she was too busy dodging greasy fingers and impatient customers. But when she finally turned to take his order, she froze. Seated in the corner booth, wearing an expensive tailored suit, was Nicholas Remington. He didn't belong here. Everything about him screamed wealth, power, privilege. Yet he sat there, watching her. His piercing blue eyes locked onto hers, studying her with an intensity that made her heart pound. She swallowed, gripping her notepad. "What can I get you?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. His lips curled slightly. "Your name?" She blinked, thrown off. "Excuse me?" "Your name," he repeated, setting his menu aside. "Before I order, I'd like to know who's serving me." Emily hesitated. Something about the way he spoke, the way he carried himself. It was like he was used to getting whatever he wanted, but she wasn't going to play along. "Emily," she said, writing on her notepad. "Now, do you want coffee or not?" To her surprise, he laughed, a deep, rich sound that sent shivers down her spine. "I'll take a coffee," he said, still smiling. "And your company, if you're willing." She raised an eyebrow. "That's not on the menu. And yet I'm willing to pay extra." She scoffed, shaking her head as she turned away. Rich men always thought they could buy anything. She had no idea that this encounter would change her life forever. 1 week later, a wedding no one expected. Emily stood in front of a massive cathedral, dressed in a gown worth more than her entire life savings. The past 7 days had been a whirlwind. Nicholas had pursued her relentlessly, taking her out to dinner, sending flowers, showing up at the diner just to see her. She had resisted at first. Men like him didn't marry girls like her. But Nicholas wasn't just any man. He was charming, persistent, and devastatingly convincing. And when he had proposed, in the middle of the diner, in front of everyone, she had said yes. Because for the first time in her life, someone had chosen her. Now, as she stood at the altar, her hands trembling in his, she looked into his eyes and believed it. She had married a millionaire, a man who promised her the world. But in just 7 days, she would discover the truth, and it would shatter everything. The first night in Nicholas's estate felt like a dream. Emily had never seen a house so enormous. It wasn't a house at all, but a mansion, complete with chandeliers that glittered like diamonds, a grand staircase straight out of a fairy tale, and windows so large she could see the entire city skyline from their bedroom. The bedroom itself was something out of a fantasy. A king-sized bed, silk sheets, a fireplace crackling in the corner. Nicholas stood by the window, his broad shoulders framed against the moonlight. He looked like a man who had it all. But something was off. Emily noticed it the moment they arrived. The way the staff avoided eye contact with her. The way the house, despite its grandeur, felt empty. And most of all, the way Nicholas kept looking at her, like he was waiting for something, like he expected something. She swallowed the unease creeping up her spine. Maybe she was overthinking. Maybe this was just a new life she wasn't used to. She took a step toward him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. "We did it," she whispered. "We're married." Nicholas turned, his blue eyes piercing into hers. "Yes," he said softly. "We did." But something in his voice made her heart stutter. It wasn't relief. It wasn't happiness. It was something else. Something she couldn't place. But before she could ask, he cupped her face, kissing her deeply, making her forget everything else. For now. A sudden rule. The next morning, Emily woke up to an empty bed. Nicholas was gone. She wrapped a silk robe around herself, stepping into the hallway, her bare feet silent against the marble floors. That's when she noticed it, a locked door. It was at the end of the hallway, massive and heavily secured. Her curiosity sparked. Why would a man like Nicholas need a locked room in his own house? Before she could get closer, a voice behind her made her jump. "Mrs. Remington." She turned to see Harris, the butler, an older man with a stony expression. His eyes flickered toward the door before settling back on her. "You mustn't go near that room," he said, his tone warning, firm. Emily frowned. "Why not?" Harris hesitated. "Because Mr. Remington has strict rules. And rule number 1? You are never to enter that room." A chill ran through her spine. "Why?" she asked, but Harris simply bowed his head. "Breakfast is ready, ma'am." Emily stared at the locked door, her pulse racing. Nicholas hadn't mentioned any rules, and now there was a room in her own home that she wasn't allowed to enter. Something wasn't right, and in just a few days she would find out why. But by then, it would already be too late. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That locked door, the cold way Harris had warned her, the uneasy silence that filled the mansion. Nicholas hadn't mentioned any rules before the wedding. Why now? She spent the morning at the dining table alone, picking at a breakfast spread fit for royalty. The staff moved around her silently, efficiently, no small talk, no warmth. It was like they were hiding something. And Nicholas? Nowhere to be found. Hours passed before she heard the heavy sound of footsteps approaching. Nicholas strode in, looking as polished and powerful as ever, dressed in a tailored suit. His expensive watch gleamed under the light. "Where have you been?" Emily asked, trying to keep her voice light. "Meeting," he said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. Meetings. She wanted to believe him, but her gut told her otherwise. She placed her fork down. "Nicholas, what's behind that locked door?" His entire body stiffened. For a second, just a split second, she saw something in his eyes. Panic. Then just as quickly, it was gone. "That's my private space," he said, his tone cool, unreadable. "Don't worry about it." Emily's fingers curled against the tablecloth. "But why is it locked?" Nicholas gave her a small, tight smile. "Because some things in this house should remain private, my love." A lump formed in her throat. "Do you trust me?" he asked suddenly, his voice softening. She swallowed. "Of course." "Then let it go." His fingers brushed against her cheek before he stood, grabbing his coat. "I have a dinner meeting tonight. Don't wait up." And just like that, he was gone again. Emily sat there staring at the door he had walked out of, her heart hammered in her chest. Nicholas was lying. She knew it. And now she had no choice but to find out the truth herself. A dangerous discovery. That night, long after the staff had gone to their quarters and the mansion had fallen into eerie silence, Emily stood in front of the locked door. Her pulse raced. Nicholas had told her to let it go, but she couldn't. Because if there was one thing Emily knew about secrets, it was that they never stayed hidden forever. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the handle, pressing against it gently. Locked. She exhaled, her mind whirling. Maybe there was another way. Her eyes darted to the hallway. The staff kept the keys somewhere downstairs. If she could just find them. A sudden noise behind her made her freeze. A sharp breath. She turned, her heart slamming against her ribs. And standing there, watching her in the dark, was Harris. His face was shadowed, but his voice was deadly quiet. "Mrs. Remington," he murmured, "I strongly suggest that you stop now." A chill ran down her spine, because the way he said it didn't sound like a warning, it sounded like a threat. Emily's breath hitched, her body tensing under Harris's gaze. His voice had been calm, too calm, like he wasn't just a butler, but something more, something dangerous. She forced herself to stand tall, refusing to let her fear show. "Why can't I go in?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Harris didn't blink. "Because Mr. Remington has rules," Emily gritted her teeth. "And what happens if I break them?" The corner of Harris's mouth twitched, just slightly. "You don't want to find out." Her stomach tightened. A tense silence stretched between them before Harris stepped back, tilting his head toward the hallway. "Go back to bed, Mrs. Remington." For a second, she considered pushing back. But the way he watched her, so calculated, so cold, made her realize something. This wasn't just about a locked door. It was about control, And right now, Nicholas had all of it. Emily took a shaky breath before nodding and turning away. But as she walked back to the bedroom, she made a silent promise. She wasn't done. She was going to find out what Nicholas was hiding, and when she did, she would never forgive him. The breaking point: Nicholas didn't return home that night, or the next. By the time 3 days passed, Emily was losing her mind. She barely ate, barely slept. The mansion felt like a prison now, the staff moving around her like ghosts. Harris watched her every move, his silent warning lingering in her mind. And Nicholas? No calls, no messages, nothing. Until suddenly, on the 4th night, he returned. Emily heard the door open in the dead of night, heavy footsteps echoing down the hall. Her body snapped awake. She threw the blankets off and rushed out of bed just as Nicholas stepped inside. Their eyes met, and for the first time since their wedding, Emily didn't recognize him. His suit was slightly disheveled, his tie loosened, and his expression, dark, unreadable. "You're back," she whispered, her throat dry. Nicholas sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's been a long few days, Emily. I don't want to fight." She stiffened. "You think I want to fight? You disappeared for days without a word, and I'm supposed to just accept that?" His jaw clenched. "It's complicated." "Then explain it to me." Silence. Nicholas exhaled, stepping forward. "Emily, I told you before, there are things in my life that I can't talk about." Her chest tightened. "Can't or won't?" Nicholas's gaze flickered. For the first time, he looked guilty, and that terrified her more than anything else, because it meant that whatever he was hiding, it was something he knew she could never accept. The forbidden door. Emily barely slept. Her mind raced with thoughts, theories, fear. But one thing was clear: she couldn't live like this. So the next day, while Nicholas was in his office, she made a choice. She was going to open that door. No more waiting, no more obeying his rules. She needed the truth. Her heart pounded as she tiptoed through the hallway, careful to avoid Harris or any of the staff. The key. She needed the key. She had seen Harris take it from a drawer in the study once. Emily slipped inside, her hands trembling as she rummaged through the desk. And then she found it, a small silver key. Her pulse thundered as she rushed to the hallway, gripping the cold metal tightly. She reached the door, slipped the key into the lock, and with a slow, agonizing click, the door creaked open. She stepped inside, and what she saw made her blood run cold. Emily's breath hitched as she stepped into the forbidden room. The air inside was cold, untouched, as if no one had entered in years. The curtains were drawn, allowing only a sliver of moonlight to seep through, casting eerie shadows across the space. At first it looked normal. A large mahogany desk, a bookshelf filled with thick, expensive, leather-bound books, a few antique chairs positioned neatly in the corner. But then she saw it, a wall of photographs. Emily's stomach dropped, because staring back at her from every single frame was herself. Dozens of pictures, some from the diner, taken from a distance, some from years ago, when she was just a teenager, walking home from school. Even some inside her old apartment, where no one should have been able to take them. Her hands shook. Why did Nicholas have these? She turned, her mind spinning, and that's when she saw it, a file, thick, sealed in a leather folder, sitting neatly on the desk. Her fingers trembled as she flipped it open, and what she read made her gasp aloud. Her real name, her birth records, her adoption papers. Nicholas knew everything, who she was, where she had been, even things she didn't know about herself. Her entire life was documented in painstaking detail. And then, at the bottom of the file, she saw something that made her vision blur. A letter, handwritten, from Nicholas himself. She picked it up, her hands trembling. The words burned into her mind. Emily, if you're reading this, it means you finally found out the truth. I never planned to tell you this way, but there are things you don't understand. You weren't a mistake. You were meant to be mine. Her breath shattered. She staggered back, and that's when a cold voice filled the room behind her. You weren't supposed to find that. Emily whirled around, and standing in the doorway, eyes dark with something unreadable, was Nicholas, a terrifying confession. Emily's heart slammed against her ribs. Nicholas took a step forward, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have come in here," her pulse thundered. "What the hell is this, Nicholas? Why do you have all of this? How long have you been watching me?" Nicholas exhaled, closing the door behind him, locking it. Emily's stomach dropped. She took a step back, clutching the file like it was a weapon. "Answer me!" Nicholas ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tight. "It's not what you think." She laughed bitterly. "Oh, because from where I'm standing, it looks like I married a man who's been stalking me for years." His gaze hardened. "I wasn't stalking you, Emily." Her voice shook. "Then what do you call this?" She waved the file at him. "You knew who I was before you ever met me. You knew everything about me, and you never told me." Nicholas's mask slipped. For the first time, she saw guilt. "I had to protect you." His voice was quiet now, but firm. "There are things about your past, about who you really are, that you don't understand." Emily's breath caught. "What are you talking about?" Nicholas hesitated. "Your real parents weren't who you think they were." Her head spun. "I don't have real parents. They died when I was a baby." Nicholas shook his head. "No, Emily, that's what they wanted you to believe." The room tilted. She staggered back, gripping the desk. "What do you mean?" Nicholas stepped closer. "You were never meant to live an ordinary life. You come from a powerful family, one that people would kill to erase." Emily's lungs tightened. This is insane," she whispered. "I was adopted from a shelter. I had nothing, no family, no money. If I came from some powerful family, why didn't they ever come for me?" Nicholas's eyes darkened. "Because they were murdered." Emily stopped breathing. A thick silence filled the room. Nicholas watched her carefully, his voice softer now. "Emily, your real name isn't Emily Carter. You're the last surviving heir of one of the wealthiest families in the country." Her vision blurred. No, this couldn't be real." Nicholas closed the distance between them, his voice almost pleading. "I married you to protect you." But Emily didn't feel safe. She felt like the ground beneath her had just vanished, and she had no idea what was waiting for her next. Emily stared at Nicholas, her chest rising and falling in quick, uneven breaths. He had just shattered everything she thought she knew about herself. Her real parents were murdered. Her name wasn't Emily Carter. She was the heir to a powerful, unknown legacy. And the man she had married, the man who had chased her, loved her, and married her in just a week, had known all along. She felt like she was drowning. You lied to me," she whispered. Nicholas's jaw tightened. "I didn't lie. I protected you." Emily let out a sharp, broken laugh. "Protected me? You stalked me for years. You married me without telling me the truth. And now I find out my whole life has been a lie?" Nicholas took a step closer, his hands outstretched as if trying to calm her. "Emily, listen to me. There are people who would kill to see you dead. If I hadn't intervened, you wouldn't have survived this long." She staggered back. "So I'm just supposed to accept that my whole life has been some secret war? That I'm in danger, but you're the only one I can trust?" Nicholas's eyes darkened. "You don't have a choice." A shiver ran through her spine, because suddenly she realized the truth. She wasn't free. She was trapped. Escape or stay. Emily's heartbeat pounded in her ears. She had two options. She could believe Nicholas, accept this insane reality, trust that he had been protecting her, and stay in this world of wealth, power, and danger. She could run, find a way out before it was too late, disappear like she had done her whole life. Her eyes flickered toward the door. It was locked. Nicholas followed her gaze. "You won't make it far," he said softly. "They're already watching." Her skin prickled. "Who?" she whispered. Nicholas exhaled, his expression deadly serious. "The same people who murdered your real parents." Emily froze. A wave of nausea washed over her. This wasn't just about her past. This was about her survival. She wasn't just some girl Nicholas had found. She was someone people wanted dead. and now she had no idea who to trust. A choice that changes everything. Nicholas stepped closer. I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to understand something. Emily's breath shook. You are the last piece of a puzzle that people have been trying to erase for years, Nicholas continued. The only reason you're alive today is because I stopped them from finding you. She swallowed hard. And now that they know I exist, Nicholas's jaw clenched. They'll come for you. Emily felt her whole world spinning. She looked at Nicholas, the man she thought was a stranger just weeks ago. Now he was her only lifeline. Her mind raced. Did she believe him? Could she trust him? Or was he the real danger? A choice had to be made, and whatever she chose, there was no turning back.